Invention, innovation, and creativity have created a new world, a world of technology. In this new world of technology, there are new modes of expressions, new ways to create and build upon the works of human achievement. As we enter this new world, we carry with us the very freedom that brought us here. The freedom to explore, to share ideas with one another, and to create something new from what is old. Some are demanding that we check our freedom at technology's door. They want us to give up our freedom in order to protect their profits. It has been said, rights don't have names until people interfere with them. Our digital rights are under siege, and we must take action. What we need is alternative freedom.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
Hey, give me a good couple of yells.
There's no logical reason why somebody motivated entirely by greed would be attracted to respecting anyone's freedom.
Richard Stallman is the most important figure in this struggle. He did 20 years ago for software what we're trying to do today for culture. He faced exactly the same threats. He was living in a community where he saw people were free to share their source code and therefore knowledge about how software arts was developed. They could practice using other people's code and remix it with their own code. It was remix culture as it applied to software. And what he discovered very troublingly was that proprietary software was destroying his opportunity for him to engage in that kind of creative remix as it applied to software. And so he built a structure to create freedom in a context in which freedom was being removed. And that was the GNU GPL license, which gets attached to software and builds on top of copyright a set of freedoms that people can rely on as running with a particular strain of software.
Well, I'm Richard Stallman. I founded the free software movement in 1983-84 with the goal of making it possible to use computers and have the freedom to cooperate with each other. And in 1984, I started developing a free software operating system, which was what we needed in order for that freedom to be possible. You can't run your computer without an operating system. But at the time, all the operating systems available for modern computers were proprietary. In other words, they trampled the user's freedom. They came with a license that said, you can't share this, and you couldn't get the plans, the source codes. You couldn't control the software yourself. So the developers were keeping the users divided and helpless. Divided by saying you're forbidden to cooperate and share, helpless because none of them had access to the plans. The only way to change this was to build another alternative, an alternative of freedom. And that's what the GNU operating system is for. So, with free software, life becomes like using the various other things we have, like cars and houses. You know, you can buy them, you can sell them, you can change them, you can drive them or live in them, and for the most part, you can do what you want with them once they're yours. Copies of software don't work like that. The proprietary software developers say that you can't buy a copy. And you can't see what's really going on in it either. So it's like a car that you can't buy, you can only rent, and the hood is welded shut or with a lock that only the manufacturer can open. And that is the state of division and helplessness that I decided to try to change. And we have changed it. We haven't gotten rid of non-free software, but we've built an alternative that millions of people live in, an alternative of freedom. The GNU General Public License is one example of a free software license that says that you are free to copy and redistribute and modify the program and publish a modified version. But it does make certain requirements. And the most important of these requirements is that whenever you distribute any version of the original program, your version must be free also. So when you pass along the code to someone else, you must also pass along the same freedom that you got from us. In other words, we forbid the middleman to stand between us and you and strip off the freedom of our software and pass on to you a restricted non-free program. That would be defeating the purpose, which is to liberate cyberspace. So we have found a way to use the existing law not to deny people freedom, but instead to defend everyone's freedom. And this general idea, which is embodied in the GNU General Public License and in some other free software licenses, the general idea we call copyleft, because you could think of taking copyright and flipping it over. Our government has been hijacked by businesses to prohibit us from doing things on our own in ways that they don't like. Prohibit cooperation, keep people divided and helpless and dependent on that business so that they have power in general. It's just divide and conquer. If we look at political thinking in our society, we'll find lots of double standards. They are rife, and I think that they are no accident. these double standards can be found because they're useful to somebody who has enough influence to have them repeated enough that people start taking them seriously. And we have democracy in form, but not much democracy in substance.
Today, Richard travels around the world spreading the knowledge of free software. He explains that the preservation of free software is a matter of scientific and democratic right. There are over 20 million users of free software globally.
The idea of sampling as a part of music creativity has become central, mainstream to what artists do. On the one hand, we have technology that enables people to engage in this act of remaking our culture more powerfully than ever before in our past. On the other hand, we have the law that says all of this creativity is illegal. Now, kids, of course, just do what they do with the technology. They don't think much about the law. So they ignore the law. That's bad. For me as a law professor, I think it's terribly bad because they develop these ideas that the law is to be ignored. But still, in some sense, they get to engage in these acts of creativity. Well, the real danger is that in the next 5 years, technology of the network is going to be so radically transformed to enforce the power of content donors to control what you do with content, that it will not just be laws that restrict, it will be the technology too. So it won't just be that they're violating the law. In order to take and remix and to re-express using the tools that will exist then will require hacking those tools in a way which will of course be illegal and also be within the capacity of just a very small segment of the population. So that's why it's so critical right now to get people to recognize what's at stake, because right now we have the chance to demonstrate what people can do with the technology and why it's important to protect that freedom before that freedom is taken away, not just by the law, but by this next generation of technology.
Culture is increasingly threatened by an outdated copyright regime. The targets of this threat are many. DJ Danger Mouse remixed an a cappella version of Jay-Z's Black Album and the Beatles' White Album, called it the Grey Album, and uploaded it to the internet for all to share freely. It is a work that bridges racial, musical, and generational gaps. Danger Mouse is remaking our culture. EMI, who controls the White Album copyright, sent out a cease and desist letter to Danger Mouse and all sites hosting the Grey Album for download. Danger Mouse's album was deemed illegal. Weeks later, as an organized protest called Grey Tuesday, over 170 websites hosted the album. That day, over 1 million tracks were downloaded.
I had mixed the Beatles before, I mixed Wu-Tang with the Beatles before, like when I was in Athens, Georgia. I'd mixed, Jefferson Airplane and Wu-Tang. I'd mixed like Hall & Oates and what else? Like, I don't know, DJ Premier, like a Gangstar, and like Edie Brickell, and just like all this, anything you can imagine, Phil Collins and the Far Side, just whatever, just ridiculous stuff, and they were on these mixtapes, and I did this stuff all the time.
This Smith, for instance, another do-it-yourself hi-fi enthusiast.
I guess when it happened, when I did it, I felt like I always thought I was going to do a record that would have a similar effect. I didn't know it was going to be illegal. I just figured at some point somebody at some label would see me blending styles or see me like kind of bridging gaps with music or whatever and be like, oh, you could do this thing, why don't you come and do this? And just never really waited, I guess, for that to happen. I figured that something like that might happen with what I did, but this was kind of something that I figured might get the attention to let that be the case. I never thought this would be the thing itself. I always kind of have been preparing for this, and I kind of had my opinions about it, but the whole way the whole thing happened was, nobody can predict that. Why? It's just, it didn't even become as big of a deal until that people weren't allowed to have it, I think, which I guess brought up a lot more questions. And I knew when I did this that it could bring up a lot of questions, never thought it would get as, like it did, but still, just even in knowing, when you do something, I had to be comfortable with the fact that it was going to bring up a lot of questions that I don't even necessarily know the answers to myself yet. I don't know if everything I was, obviously it wasn't technically legal, but while I was doing it, I couldn't think about that. It was hard enough to do as it was. It was stressful enough working with these two artists that I admire so much that I didn't want to screw up what I was trying to do. Then at the end, when I started giving it out there to friends and promoting it to people and saying, hey, what do you think of this? And, that's when I started to realize, well, I don't know what the hell this is going to do. Like, I don't know a lot of the, there's a lot of questions still. I just had to be comfortable with the fact that I'm just not going to know the answers.
Danger Mouse was accused of violating copyright law by creating an unauthorized remix of the Beatles' White Album. He was told to take the Grey Album down in compliance with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The DMCA was a law written by Congress to protect digital code with copyright. The enactment of this law has hindered creativity, innovation, and invention.
When they're talking about piracy, let's say, they say, music and films and this and that are all being pirated.
Piracy is attacking ships.
Oh, so it's pirates now, huh? I've been down where a lot of these fellas used to hang out.
Honest? Where?
Florida Keys.
What they're trying to fight is the huge drop-off in record sales, right? And because they can't fight it by throwing money at it, because everything is over-publicized at this point. You buy soda, and you hear about Britney Spears. So you really can't saturate the market anymore with advertisement, with product awareness, with new product awareness. They know when records are old. They know when singles are new. Like, everybody hears it.
They're going to have to offer something to the youth on their own level.
They're criminalizing these people because you're saying that no matter what the individual gets out of this, it's an expense, and they're at a loss. So they're totally treating them like they are to be taken from, so they're criminals. When it is also about exploring taste, and really is for the betterment and is promotion as well. It's interesting, they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're definitely losing friends by exhibiting characteristics that are like more akin to like, hordes, like emperors and armies than being tastemakers and acceptors of people's place and provider of the escape route. They're really assuming the corporate half of things by pursuing these people and making examples of them, which is an intense thing to do. That's actually the artist's job. But, it's like making something out of an example, showing its relatedness to all examples. You know what I mean? That's intense when they're definitely doing it on the behalf of artists. So whatever Metallica's about or not, whoever is out there headhunting on their behalf or whatever the large group may be, it's intense, And it's not to save them their money, I don't really think. I mean, it's difficult to say. But it's the days of the rock star and the $1 million on the artist's behalf have always been confusing, though. Like, there were no rappers that made $1 million. A lot of them got jerked. The contracts were to put you in a lifestyle and a catbird seat, but really you don't own things. It's the same major labels. They own masters. So they've made the artist live off of the environment, right? So the artist has to live off the environment and his copyright and his intellectual property, if he even has that still. And giving that away creates a very empty bed to lie in, I think, in a lot of ways.
I just want to say that I don't think it matters how much money the record companies are losing, because the record companies have no importance. Our freedom is infinitely more important than record company profits. When they call the people who share, quote, pirates, unquote, you can see that this is demonizing people for being good to each other. So we should reject this propaganda term completely. Why should we go along with calling people dirty names for helping their neighbors? It's good to help your neighbor. People who share music, people who share software, people who share books or whatever are not doing something wrong. And we have to reject the words that say they're doing something wrong. The question of legitimacy of music sharing on the internet really has nothing to do with whether we're supporting music. That's a fiction made up by the record companies to excuse the power that they want to have. And we should throw it in their faces. We should completely reject it. We shouldn't try to we shouldn't limit ourselves to superficial counter-arguments, accepting their basic premises and saying, but you're not really losing money because of this. Because we shouldn't accept their claim that it would matter if their sales went down. Why shouldn't their sales go down? Their sales went up before. If they go down now, so what? The profits of these companies do not matter. In fact, actually I should correct that. These companies are treating the public in such an arrogant way that any decrease in their income is justified. It is justice. What these companies deserve is to go broke.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything!
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
The EFF is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They try to make sure that consumers have their rights, people are free, and that corporate interests and government interests sort of don't take things over. So they fight a lot of cases for the public good. So against the Patriot Act, against the DMCA, against a whole bunch of other things that have come on.
EFF became the de facto pro bono public interest law firm to sort of take up the rights of individuals. We were sort of the the ACLU of the internet, or the 911 of the internet when something happened. Other issues that we really started to take on were also laws and lawsuits trying to control technology. The issue with BUNNIE is that BUNNIE basically was performing a practice that has been a long part of American history, which is reverse engineering, or as some people like to call it, tinkering. And basically, he had bought an Xbox, he had taken it apart, he looked inside, figured out how it worked, and said there's a lot of interesting things you could do with this Xbox. He decided he wanted to write a book about it because he thought it was really interesting, and that he wanted to share the knowledge he had learned. So really at this point it was about sharing knowledge, teaching other people, helping other people learn to do interesting things with technology. Basically his publisher got scared. Microsoft is a massive company. The DMCA technically says that you're not supposed to assist other people in circumventing how a technology works. The Xbox had certain protections to make sure it worked properly, and in modifying it you do bypass some of those protections.
A lot of the original context for hacking Xbox was when I was doing my PhD research. My advisor, Dr. Tom Knight, had provided me with our whole group with a bunch of video game hardware, relatively cheap, good examples of good hardware production, and told us to take it apart. In the case of the Xbox, I was like, oh, this is a PC, I ought to be able to use it as a PC. And when I first started taking the pieces out of it and trying to reprogram it, there was something in the way. The security was kind of blocking me from doing it. I'm like, well, that's not right. And it was kind of an interesting puzzle at that point. It's like, they put something there to prevent me from doing what I want to do with it. I wonder if I can get around it. At the group meeting, I sort of presented my findings on what I did. And back then, I actually didn't know what the DMCA was. And so at that group meeting, my advisor closes the door and says, the next half hour doesn't exist. Let me explain to you this thing called the DMCA and why you should be a little worried about it, right? And after the meeting, he's like, maybe you should go up to the upstairs and find a bandsaw and just sort of grind up the Xbox and throw away the files right now, because you could end up in a whole lot of trouble for it. I found that to be a little dissatisfying, that I had to sort of self-censor or anything like that. And we talked to some lawyer friends at the EFF, and we ended up writing an academic paper about it, since it was done at an academic institution, and I was a legitimate researcher at the time. There's actually an exemption in the DMCA for that sort of stuff.
And when you're satisfied with your vote, a new privilege awaits you.
America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening. To Mother and her family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation. It's the Cracker Barrel of philosophers in Crabtree Corners. And it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, Flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Danger Mouse and Bunnie are victims of copyright's oppressive regime. A regime that Lessig, SCHULTZ, and STALLMAN each fight against. Their enemy is corporate greed and ignorant lawmakers. What's at stake is our innovative and creative spirit, our economic and cultural vitality.
Who gets to be the innovators? Who gets to be the creators of new technologies that are interesting? If it is illegal to modify your own Xbox, if it's illegal to write a peer-to-peer file sharing program, the only people who will control what can be made are the Microsofts of the world, are the recording industries of the world. And so what's at stake is, I mean, if you really believe in a marketplace of ideas, and you believe that innovation comes from places we didn't even predict, right? If you believe that the next cool thing will come from a company we've never heard of, then you want a market where people can experiment. You want people like Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers who didn't get permission and just built something they thought was interesting. The DMCA and these other regulations threaten to control who gets to be the innovator, who gets to be the creator. The threat that the DMCA brings to reverse engineering is really a threat to everyone who loves to pick and choose what they want to buy to work with other devices they own. If you like to accessorize, if you like to pick out your preference for your monitor, your mouse, your cell phone, you know, your PDA, whatever it is, you are a fan of reverse engineering, you may just not know it. And so that's why fundamentally it's so worth fighting for, is because it keeps all of us with options, keeps all of us with innovation, keeps all of us with competition in the marketplace that makes it so much fun to use technology.
It's kind of strange, but it's really worked out very well.
There had been a long history in the United States and around the world that when you bought something, a device of any kind, a telephone, a television set, you know, a car, you could take it home and tinker with it all you wanted, right? You owned it. You took it home, you took it apart, you broke it, you had to buy a new one, you know, you had to figure out how to fix it. And that this is part of a long history of innovation, you know, where Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, Alexander Graham Bell, they didn't suddenly magically think of the perfect system for telephones or the light bulb. They tinkered. Benjamin Franklin tinkered. I mean, all these people tinkered. And what we started to realize was that more and more Congress is passing laws and companies were filing lawsuits against people who were tinkering with products. And they were trying to say it's illegal. You can't touch it. Even though you bought it, you can't touch it. And so EFF started to become more and more involved in those cases as well, fighting for freedoms. That the freedoms that we have always had and traditionally had in our society, we shouldn't lose simply because technology becomes better, more advanced, or takes us online into a different world.
The driving question on the Commissioner's mind, can democracy compete with its right hand tied to a hitching post?
When the recording industry and the motion picture industry attacked file sharing software, saying that it should be illegal, we were one of the few organizations to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's some legitimate uses here. File sharing can actually really benefit society in some ways. And when you have a technology that has both good and bad uses, you shouldn't ban it. You should embrace it and try and make the best of it, and you should try and limit the bad uses. But you shouldn't ban the technology overall. And so for a long time in history, intellectual property was really a way of regulating competition so that people wouldn't get ripped off unfairly. And then you started to see a trend, and I'm not even sure when it started, but it definitely in the last 20 or 30 years, where these laws started to be targeted at individuals, or small businesses, or little people, basically. And it wasn't so much unfair competition. It wasn't that these little people were somehow stealing all the business of the big people, but that the companies who were upset because you were using their product in some way they just didn't like. You started to see this in copyright law with the VCR. It was a prime case. It's a big case we talk about a lot. It's actually the 20th anniversary of the Supreme Court case on the VCR. It was a big battle that went all the way up to the Supreme Court about whether the VCR was illegal or not under copyright law. Because on the one hand it allowed you to make copies of movies without permission, which was considered illegal. But on the other hand, it allowed you to do things like skip commercials. It allowed you to do things like save a show that you recorded from the TV and watch it later, what's called time shifting. And these were considered fair uses. And these were also things that consumers were doing. That consumers bought a device and they watched TV and they recorded it and watched it later, and that was considered good. But the movie studios sued anyway, and they took Sony all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided 5-4 by one vote that the VCR was legal. It was almost banned, actually, which is hard to imagine now. The rental market for the movie industry is their biggest market. They make more money by far in that market than they ever did from theatrical productions. But as much as the VCR case was targeted at stopping Sony, it was also targeted at stopping consumers. Stopping consumers from taping things in their homes, right? And it started this war. Who controls what you do in your own home? Who controls what you do by yourself? So copyright law went through this battle for a long time. And the makers of content, primarily the Hollywood industries and the recording industries, freaked out. Because all of a sudden, every single user on the internet had their own copy machine for free and could talk to everyone else in the world and could copy whatever they wanted. And they had no idea what they were going to do about that. They really were taken off guard. The other thing that they did, though, is they started to realize that they needed to control Congress, and they needed to pass laws that would give them bigger guns to fight this war. Because all of a sudden, the hundreds of millions of users of the internet were empowered with technologies that they couldn't control. And so they passed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act through Congress. And what the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is, it fundamentally changed the balance of power in copyright law. Traditionally, there had been this notion that it was an unfair competition law. You basically just could sue those people in the marketplace that were trying to sell the same thing you were selling. But ever since the VCR case, it was clear that you couldn't really go after the people in their homes, and you couldn't go after makers of devices that had good and bad purposes. And so the copyright owners were frustrated that they couldn't control what people were doing. This law changed that. This law said that if you protect your content in some way, whatever it is, music, movies, whatever, if you put some kind of limitation on how people can use it, it will now be illegal for anyone to, what they call, circumvent that limitation. So if I take some music and I put it inside a digital envelope and I close the lock, anyone who opens that lock does something illegal. And in addition, it says anyone who helps anyone open that lock, either by making a tool or by showing them how to do it, can also be held liable under the law.
But the horse was to have some revenge, for the early autos often needed live horsepower.
Before I wrote my paper, my book about it, there were only a few cases that were pretty high profile, but it wasn't, they just needed more mass, more critical mass, and so they were trying to build a critical mass of, sort of establishing a baseline, and also recording carefully the sort of the chilling effects, like, the effort I had to go through to actually publish You know, as opposed to if I were to write about, you know, hamster wheels or something like that, I would have no hesitation writing a paper about it. But instead, I have to go through like several months of lawyer counseling and scrubbing and positioning, and that's a chilling effect on research. If you talk to a high school age hacker in the United States about these things, they're aware of the DMCA, and there's things that they're not willing to explore, right? People worry about it. I mean, everyone in general wants to obey the law. No one wants to blatantly, even if it's a poorly written law, they're going to try to obey it. A lot of researchers in the United States hesitate to even touch anything involving commercial crypto now. Even though there's a lot of previous cases that sort of said that you can do it, it's a big hassle. So they don't want to pull the university and employ resources. In fact, university lawyers will strongly discourage you from doing it anyways, because the university just doesn't want to have the name tainted with a lawsuit. So there's a bit of a chilling effect there. Whereas if you go overseas, there's a lot of very young people who are extremely good at understanding the very core details of how computers work at a very basic level, because they have been taking things apart piece by piece by piece, oftentimes for applications that are not necessarily completely legal. A lot of these people who live in countries that don't have as good economies, they can't afford even a $20 or $30 piece of software on their salaries, right? And so they kind of can look at it and say, I can either save for 3 months to buy this $20 piece of software, or I can go ahead and spend 3 months exploring and learning and taking things apart until finally I can use it in a fashion that is usable to me, right? And so I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong in this case, but it's kind of an essential thing for them to do. But the side effect of that is that they have now this very strong base of understanding of technology in their youth. It's to be seen over the next couple of decades how that plays out, but I have a feeling that, like the United States, for example, is sort of losing a bit of an edge, because so many people in the U.S. are being attracted away from this core sort of digging down in the computers practically, for a number of societal and economic reasons, but DMCA, I think, contributes to that. And furthermore, in academia, a lot of professors are unwilling to sort of criticize publicly a corporate implemented security system for fear of persecution.
Oh, that's good.
No, lady, that's bad.
If something is truly a quality product and people want it, they're going to go out and pay for it and buy it. Like, my book is offered a Creative Commons license, which means you're free to copy it, distribute it electronically, and put it in public presentations however you want. Like, someone can go ahead and take my book, cut off the spine, feed it through a PDF reader, and then start putting copies for free on the web, if they wanted to, right? But I still sell lots of books, even though I have that license on the book, and why is that? Well, it's because a lot of people just like having that shelf of books, the solid thing to hold, like that bound volume has value to it, right? And, I buy certain games because there's a lot of value in getting that nice, cool, big poster they can put in the wall of the map of whatever the world you're exploring or something like that, and all the little paraphernalia that comes with it in the cute box. And a lot of times you also just want to support like your favorite artist, right? I'll buy music from my favorite. In fact, I would be more likely to buy music if I knew a bigger cut went to the artist. They say an optimist sees a glass as half full, pessimist sees it half empty, an engineer or a hacker sees a glass as being twice as big as it was needed to be, right? And so for me being a hacker, it's like I see something and I'm like, that's not right, let's fix it. And for some reason I just get a satisfaction out of using my hands, right, putting something together, and at the end of the day turning on and seeing it work, and you're like, I did something that was useful, hopefully, at least to myself. Maybe, and I like to put in larger context. I like to imagine that the things I do will somehow make someone else's life better in some way. That's part of the reason why I like to write up things I do and put them on my website for free, so that people can go ahead and share my experiences and my ideas and sort of use them to better improve their lives. I mean, it doesn't make me personally wealthy monetarily, right? But it makes me very at peace with myself, and that's happiness for me. I like to just be at peace with myself and at peace with the world.
Mind if I read it first?
Hurry up!
Keep your shirts on, boys. including my freedom. Freedom? What? Sign away my freedom? Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our system of free enterprise isn't perfect, but I had an idea. And because he was free to dream his dream and tinker, Joe had a chance to make something of himself and his idea. So, of course, some people didn't think so much of Joe's idea, but that didn't stop him. So Joe got some money from young Aunt Minnie and Uncle Angus and Grandpappy and Mr. Titus. When Joe's friends and relatives used their savings to help him buy tools and property, they were capitalists. Don't blush, folks. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, naturally, Joe needed some help. So he hired Willie Lumpkin, who was out of work anyway, and before long, Willie had the know-how and became skilled labor. Because capital, management, and labor worked together, Joe's idea grew. It grew and did things even he never dreamed of.
Libertarians, net libertarians, are obsessed in their fear of the government. And, in my view has always been, you should be afraid of the government, but it's not the only danger out there, right? So the technologies that now are free and basically enable people to engage in free recreativity will be changed, not because the government mandates that they be changed, but they'll be changed because record companies get together with technology companies and using the threat of copyright liability, induce the technology companies to build another generation of the network, another generation of the internet. So internet version control will be a technology where the freedoms that you've got right now because of the nature of the internet are removed because that's the deal that was necessary to be struck to protect these content industries which have built a model of producing and distributing content in the 20th century. Right? So last century's idea of kind of the Soviet broadcast culture, broadcast to the people. And the people are supposed to consume what you feed them, as opposed to remix culture, where culture is both top-down and bottom-up. There's some broadcast, but there's a bunch that's remixed and remade and shared by citizens. That second model of culture threatens 20th century business models, and they're using the law and technology to stop the move to the 21st century. I don't know what it is about us, we Americans right now, that we seem to have lost the capacity for thought that's anything other than just binary thought, like either yes or no, or either you're for copyright or you're against copyright, either you're for the war on terror or you're a terrorist, right? That's the options that were presented in this culture, and that of course is debilitating for any progress here. Copyright is not a thing. It's not an idea that was given to us by Aristotle and we've sort of continued to husband it for the last 2,000 years. Copyright is an extraordinarily complex set of regulation that has radically changed in the last United States in the last 50 years. It's radically changed. And so understanding that it's radically changed should at least open people's minds to the idea that maybe it's been changed in the wrong ways. Right? Maybe we made some turns to the left when we should have turned to the right. Right? I mean, there's lots of detail here. And so we've been arguing for relatively modest modifications of the existing copyright regime that would bring it back to a lot of the features it had just 30 years ago. I say, how radical can my view be when I would be happy to live under the copyright regime that Richard Nixon gave us, right? I mean, how extreme can that be, right? But the debate has been so skewed that if you raise the idea of modifying copyright, it's only understood as the idea that you want to starve artists, you want to drive Hollywood out of business. And so getting beyond that simplicity, that sort of simpleton thought, I think is the first step. And that's the role of Creative Commons, really. I mean, Creative Commons is a demonstration of the idea. There isn't black and white. There's a spectrum of rights, from all rights reserved to the public domain. And we want to give people an opportunity, a simple opportunity, to pick up whatever mix they want and make their work available under it, so that increasingly people recognize that it isn't just, are you in favor of copyright or not? It's, well, what kind of copyright? What is the appropriate way to make your work available?
America is still paying the price for liberty even to this year of 1900 and now. Let's get to the point.
If you're a Hollywood studio, I totally understand all rights reserved. That makes sense. But if you're a scientist and you publish an article under a regime that says nobody's allowed to copy this or use it in any way without getting my permission first, I want to say to you, by what right do you call yourself a scientist if that's the way you make your work available? Right? If you're a scientist, what that means is you're making your work available for others to build on and change and to criticize or to incorporate. And so you ought to be doing your work in a way consistent with those ideals. And all rights reserved is not consistent with those ideals. Right? Same thing with academics in general. Right? The idea that you would publish your articles in a law review in a way that says nobody's allowed to copy it just seems to me inconsistent with the ideals of what you ought to be doing. And inconsistent with even your own self-interest, because if your interest is to get your ideas out there, then locking them up and requiring permission up front is a really bad way to do exactly that. So we're just trying to show that there's a great space between 0 and 1. And the more we can show it, the more we weaken this extremism in the debate, extremism of the demands that we have to have the ability to exercise total control, or else we'll lose America's content industry. That's the most dangerous thought right here, and it's driving policy in Washington, which is, from my experience, essentially clueless. The Congress is clueless, except for 5 members of Congress. We can list them, right, who understand the balance of this. The rest of them are clueless about how they're being played by the content industry.
A bit more to it than that. I mean, there's certain rights involved here I happen to believe in. Well, I may not agree with everything they say, but what's the clarion rest of it? I'll defend their right to say it. Well, that's what democracy's all about, isn't it? I mean, free speech, including the right of dissent, and human rights over property rights. All right?
Oh, boy.
If you ever heard such bunkum, read your Constitution.
Danger Mouse did something that is creative with respect to someone who spends all their time in their bedroom making their music, enjoying what they enjoy, right? He did something that I would expect of all these DJ-type people that I know and have known. And he did that, and he put those two things together like something he would do for himself, almost.
Sampling is not like a nuclear bomb, In the wrong hands, it's not going to really do that much damage still, It's not going to really hurt anybody necessarily. I think that the way it's going right now is it's becoming everybody's. It is a lot, a big sharing thing. It's like, if you do something that's great, it's for everybody else to then take on and do whatever they want with, because it's not really in your hands anymore. Once you put it out there, it's not yours anymore. Like in our culture, that's why DJing is such a huge thing, because it's so in our nature, especially people who are in that kind of indie thing, to kind of be the person to get somebody else into something. You get so much more out of it knowing when you see something, oh my God, so-and-so is going to love this or whatever. I can't wait for this person to hear it. And that's what the whole spirit about what we do is. And that's what file sharing in a lot of ways is. It's just way more dumbed down version of that. It's like, here it is, let's all check it out. So that's why DJing is such a big thing, because it's instant gratification for discovering something very quickly, which is very, humanistic. So you pick up your guitar, or you can play a record. You play a record that's really good. A lot of people are like, oh, that shit is great. You pick up a guitar after playing it for a week, and it's like, what are you doing? It sucks ass. And it's so I think younger people getting into DJing so quickly, it's that instant gratification that we all like to have from sharing one thing with another person. And file sharing, I think, just goes along with that. It's just like, here it is, check it out, dig it, here you go. And there's not that much thinking involved in it. There's not, you know, it's not a whole lot of, well, I do this, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It's just not a very human way of being to, like, think through all the things that are going on when you do it. It's just natural to do that, to share it. You hear a cool story, you fucking go tell it. That's it. You know, you can't wait to tell it. You do things just so you can tell the story that you did it. I just hit the camera. To think that, you know, that we're going to know what it's going to be like in 10 years from now, what new technologies are going to be there or whatever is, you know, you just don't know. And to be so kind of worried about sampling this or sampling that, I don't know the ins or outs of how it would work, but it's not that far off for me, you know, to think that at some point I can sing into a microphone and through the other end could be John Lennon to Jimi Hendrix to Johnny Cash, you know, like, and once that happens, you know, then you're going to have a movement of people who are like, well, you know, what would it be like for, you know, if Jimi Hendrix was to rap, you know what I mean? And then people will be like, don't use his voice to rap. He would never rap. Or Johnny Cash, he would never do that. Don't use it to do that. You know, you can blend this person with that person, or you can do this thing or that thing with it musically. But at the end of the day, if it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's not. If people want it, they'll get it. If they don't, then they don't. There's the one thing you can't really control is what's good and bad based on technology. Because you can come up with whatever inventions you want to, but if, you know, if people want them, they'll have it. You can't really stop people from getting what they want, I guess.
Every instrument in this room is constantly monitoring, testing, pulse-taking, controlling.
When I did it, you know, I still had the original files when I was done with the whole thing and had it on a disc and everything. It never said gray album. It wasn't even gray. It had nothing to do with that. It said white album and black album. That's all it said on the files and the disc, everything when it was done. I never called it the Gray Album until I was going to press it up on some, like, with some, like, you know, little bit of artwork and everything, and I was like, what the hell am I going to call this thing? Is it going to be white and black, or black and white versus black, or of something obscure? And gray was just too obvious, just too corny to me. First thing I thought of was, like, that movie, Soul Man. It's about a guy who basically, a white guy who puts on a bunch of makeup and then gets like a wig and makes himself black so he can get a minority scholarship. So he does this, and then Rae-Dawn Chong becomes his love interest, and she thinks he's black and all this stuff or whatever, and this girl wants to date him just because he's black, because it's this white girl who just wants to date him because he's black. So she talks about how, like, it's like shades of gray. Like, she had this, like, vision of this story, this book that she was writing called Shades of Gray. And he basically disses her because he realizes that's the only way, like, the only reason she wants to date him because he's black. So she can do the shades of gray. So then, like, at the end of the movie, she's, like, dating some Indian guy. She's saying shades of pink or whatever. Anyway, so that was the first thing I thought of, was the whole shades of gray thing, and how, like, you know, how I grew up, whatever, you know, in a Jewish neighborhood, then going to a black neighborhood, and then my ethnicity being a lot of different things, you know, being African American, but then, like, obviously there's something else there going on. But, like, it just became so much more representative, the whole thing, and I said, you know what, fuck it, I'll just, it means so much more than just, I was trying to really downplay the whole thing, and when I was finished with it and I listened to it, I thought it, you know, it meant a lot more, especially if people understood what I was really trying to do with it. So I called it the Gray Album.
Sunny Betamax Doctrine is the principle that has allowed our nation's economy to surge forward for the last 23 years. It's one that basically said technology is legal if it has significant legal uses. If you read the other side's briefs, what they're asking for is the content owners or any copyright owner to have a veto right over new technology. We were reviewing the products at the recent International Consumer Electronics Show, the most innovative products. And these are products which shift content in time and space and among devices. The majority of the new product introductions that we're seeing now and that are coming in the future have directly to do with how content is moved around. And it would be absolutely restrictive on our economy and our technological development if we were to change the rules of the game now. It would dry up capital and it would dry up innovation. And it sounds like we're overstating it, but we're not.
These stories are about more than copyright, technology, and law. They are about our democracy in decline. Robert Maynard Hutchins wrote, "The death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It will be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment."
Citizens of cyberspace, the inhabitants, are most of them currently under an oppressive regime where they're forbidden to cooperate with each other and they can't control the software they use. This is the regime of non-free software. And the goal of the free software movement is to liberate these people.
Richard Stallman has always been a visionary, and he's always been one of those people you can count on to speak his mind and speak the truth as he sees it. Richard's always been able to really focus on what are the big picture issues here, why is this important. He saw it with the battle over free versus proprietary software. Why is it important that we have software that's open, or free for people to use? And I think we're just starting to get a vision of that now, which is that if it's free and open to use, you can do what you want with it. No one else can tell you what you can and can't use it for. And I think that's going to become more and more important as we go down the road. Unfortunately, I think it also presents a real clash of cultures in that many of us have grown up in a world where a lot of things are owned by proprietary companies and we are told what to do, and getting from here to there, getting from where we are now to this world that Richard wants us to get to is a very tough road. He challenges us, but it's a good challenge, and it's about figuring out where each piece of the puzzle fits in, where we can all work together to fight the right fight, to make sure that we don't lose things that we don't yet know are on the table to lose, that we haven't lost a battle that we didn't even know we were fighting.
Lawrence Lessig is founder and chairman of the board of Creative Commons. There are over 12 million works registered under Creative Commons licenses. Like free software, Creative Commons is alternative freedom in progress.
Right now we're in the middle of this battle about something called the Induce Act, which is a statute that would create a new kind of liability for companies who produce technology. And if you can say that the technology is being designed to induce people to engage in copyright violations, then the company producing the technology will be liable under the Copyright Act. This is a radical change in American copyright law. Yet Senators Leahy and Hatch intended to attach this to a bill and pass it overnight without any hearings at all on it, because they had been convinced by Hollywood that this was just a minor little change in the law that would have no substantial effect on anything except the most egregious forms of criminal behavior which they associate with any kind of peer-to-peer network. Now, it's astonishing to me, A, that you would try to do such a major change in copyright law right now, but B, that you could be so duped by the content industry into believing you're not doing anything substantial when it is fundamentally, clearly, radical change in what the law is. That's a picture of how out of touch they are from these issues. And they're out of touch because this is not a political issue for anybody. Right? The Republicans don't talk about it, the Democrats don't talk about it. It's an invisible issue. What's got to happen is that people have got to know about these stories, these examples, increasingly connect the dots. And once you connect the dots, it's a very simple picture. There's a huge amount of wealth devoted to stopping the industry becoming something where a wide range of people can participate in creating and sharing culture. There's a huge amount of wealth devoted to keeping the world in the 20th century, to keeping the world in this broadcast method of producing culture. And there's no justification for that. No justification that's based on helping artists, helping consumers. It just helps a very small number of companies, a handful of companies. And people have got to wake up to it and start demanding that it change. And demand it change at a very practical political level. We ought to shame the Democrats and the Republicans for selling, the soul of Americans' potential creativity to a very small set of powerful lobbying interests. They ought to be ashamed of what they've allowed to occur. And, we ought to encourage politicians in the Republican and Democratic Party and even, the Green Party types to begin to take this on as an issue. Free speech is important, free culture is just as important.
If I don't see a clear solution and how it's going to work, I'm a pessimist. But I don't give up just because something's discouraging. What would there be to do other than try to have democracy? All of what we're doing, we being those who would like to have democracy and an end to corporate rule and respect for people's human rights in America, what we're doing is not enough, and none of us knows how to make it enough. If we knew, we would do it.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance, you know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. Don't throw those bottles. Don't throw those bottles. No! Oh, no!
Working together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.
I just wanted people to hear it. Mission accomplished. I'm not upset that it didn't get released and I made a bunch of money off of it or whatever. I just wanted a bunch of people to hear it and maybe change people's perceptions about what they thought about, rock and roll music or the Beatles, or what they thought about hip hop and Jay-Z with all his, bling shit. It's just perceptions, and there's no. Me doing that for the time I was doing it, I was getting off on it the whole time. Everything I did, every song that was anywhere near being done, every time something would work.
The most important steps that people can do right now is to encourage this kind of creativity, remix creativity, and then become political about laws that restrict it. So become aware of what's possible and then defend it. And recognize that this struggle has a lot of history behind it, so there's lots to learn about it if you want to learn about it. But you don't have to learn about all the history to kind of feel the injustice of the system as it exists right now.
In fact, when I was at MIT, I had just finished finding the Xbox, and Jay Allard, like the head of the whole Xbox, the big cheese, right, gives a talk at MIT about the Xbox. And so I'm sitting in the crowd, and I was told by my lawyers not to mention to him that, I had done this because they hadn't worked out all the legal details and finished communicating with Microsoft. And he's sitting there at the talk saying how the Xbox will never be cracked and how, not never, but, it's going to be very, very hard to crack and they'll write emulators for it and all these things. And I'm sitting there in the crowd don't say anything, don't say anything.
These issues are complex, and you issue a press release or you talk to a reporter and you've got to whittle it all down to a soundbite. Why is the DMCA bad? Oh, Lee, I shut off the printer because we're doing an interview. So it finished printing whenever it was printing. But okay, but if you could send it to the other ones, that would be cool. Thanks.
The internet is an intense tool, and reality television. I used to watch Alf every Tuesday. Rain or shine, right? Or whatever the fuck it was, Monday. And these kids today, they watch This American Top Model thing. And what is funny and ironic and intense is eating disorders and trivial relationships being caught on in eye. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's wild, because that's going to develop an imagination base for the next 50 years of art and music. It's going to be pretty interesting.
Don't let yourself pay money to the MPAA, to the people who took away your freedom with the DMCA, to support films that are crap. Why support crap anyway? The only reason they keep doing it is because people will pay them for it. But not me.